You didn't just hear a rumor about a royal memo. You are watching the future King of the United Kingdom quietly accuse his own government of crossing a constitutional red line that has stood firm for centuries. What we are dealing with today is a 12-page document that sources confirm was hand-delivered directly to number 10 Downing Street, triggering an immediate and frantic emergency crisis meeting behind closed doors. According to insiders, the reaction from the government was not to engage in dialogue, but to launch a desperate scramble to suppress the information, allegedly attempting to gag the media by citing national security concerns. That is not how a democratic government reacts to a polite disagreement with the palace. That is how a government reacts to an indictment. The reports coming out of White all describe a scene of absolute pandemonium when the contents of this document became known to the inner circle. Why is everybody this scared of 12 pages of constitutional argument? Because this wasn't just about royal protocol or ceremonial duties. It was about power, secrecy, and the fundamental question of who gets to rewrite the rules of the British Constitution. Tonight I am going to walk you through exactly what this document contains. We will break down the 5 specific constitutional bombshells Prince William is said to have laid out in forensic detail. We are talking about the accusation of unlawful usurpation of the royal prerogative, a move that some legal scholars are privately calling a constitutional coup. We will examine the reckless disregard for the Commonwealth realms where shared monarchy rules are reportedly being rewritten without consultation. We will expose the secret purge clause aimed at the civil service designed to intimidate neutral officials who might resist political overreach. Furthermore, we will look at the damaging charge of public mandate deceit, where the government is accused of pushing reforms they never put in their manifesto. And finally, the most severe warning of all, that this entire agenda poses an imminent and existential threat to the unity of the United Kingdom itself. This is not merely a story about a clash between Prince William and Keir Starmer. It is a stress test of British democracy. It is a story about what happens when a government decides it can quietly rewrite the powers of the Crown, the civil service, and the Constitution, hoping that you are too distracted to notice. But the leak has happened. The silence is broken. And now we must face the reality of what William's intervention truly means for the future of this country. To truly understand why 12 pages of text caused such a tremor within the walls of Downing Street, we must first look at the context that the government has tried so hard to obscure. For months, there has been quiet chatter in Westminster about a new legislative push, something the administration has innocuously labeled modernizing the monarchy. On the surface, the pitch was designed to sound reasonable, even necessary. They claimed they were merely streamlining outdated traditions, trimming the fat of ceremonial duties, and making the institution more efficient for the 21st century. It was sold to the public and the press as a housekeeping exercise, a minor adjustment to an old system. But Prince William's memo exposes that narrative for exactly what it is, a deception, what the government called modernization. The memo reveals as power consolidation dressed up as reform. The document argues that by stripping away these so-called ceremonial powers, the executive branch was actually removing the subtle invisible wires that keep a prime minister's power in check. They weren't just changing a ceremony. They were attempting to fundamentally alter the balance of the Constitution, effectively transferring authority from a neutral crown to a partisan government. And they made one fatal miscalculation in their strategy. They assumed the Prince of Wales would stay silent. For too long, the political class has viewed William through the lens of photo opportunities and charity galas. They saw a figurehead, a man who cuts ribbons and shakes hands, not someone who reads the fine print of constitutional law. They expected him to play the palace game, to smile, wave, and accept the erosion of his institution with dignified silence. They thought they were dealing with a ceremonial prince who would prioritize politeness over principle. They were wrong. When that memo landed on the Prime Minister's desk, the assumption that the Crown was a passive observer evaporated instantly. William didn't write a complaint about protocol. He wrote an indictment of executive overreach. He demonstrated that while the government was playing the short game of political PR, he was playing the long game of constitutional preservation. He saw the trap that had been set. If the monarchy agreed to these changes, they would become complicit in their own irrelevance. If they fought back publicly, they would be accused of meddling in politics. So William chose a third option. He used the language of the state against the state itself. He didn't argue based on emotion or tradition. He argued based on law and precedent. This section of the leak reveals that the palace isn't just a tourist attraction. In moments like this, it functions as the last line of defense against a government that forgets it is supposed to be limited by something bigger than itself. The panic in number 10 wasn't just about a leak. It was the realization that the man they thought was merely holding a title was actually holding the line. This brings us to the first and perhaps the most legally explosive of the 5 bombshells contained in the memo: the alleged coup against the royal prerogative. To understand the gravity of this charge, we have to look past the pageantry and understand the mechanics of the British state. The royal prerogative is not just a collection of ancient privileges. It constitutes the reserve powers that allow the government to function, the power to deploy troops, to sign treaties, to grant mercy. For centuries, these powers have technically belonged to the crown, but are exercised by ministers. It is a delicate balance, a system of checks and balances where the crown acts as the ultimate safeguard against executive excess. However, William's memo reportedly uncovers a clause in the proposed legislation that would shatter this balance. The document accuses the government of attempting an unlawful usurpation of these powers. The prince argues that the administration isn't just trying to exercise these powers. They are trying to transfer ownership of them directly to the Prime Minister's office, effectively cutting the monarch out of the loop entirely. In legal terms, William describes this as ultravi, acting beyond one's legal power, an authority. He is essentially arguing that the government is trying to steal the keys to the Constitution under the guise of tidying up the law. The language used in this section of the memo is described by insiders as blistering. It strips away the polite fiction of parliamentary procedure and attacks the moral legitimacy of the move. One specific line, which sources say caused absolute silence in the crisis meeting, reads, "You cannot vote yourself powers the crown has held for 600 years. That is not democracy.